And a major Canadian export, the U.S. Commerce Department is hiking anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood lumber to 20.56%.
And we are fighting unjustified tariffs. This is another unjustified tariff. You can expect us to fight against it. And you can expect us to take specific steps to protect those workers. Canada does not dump lumber into the United States.
Canada just cut off the entire U.S. lumber supply, and the shockwaves are tearing through America's housing market like a wrecking ball. One of the biggest trade lifelines was yanked overnight, leaving builders stranded and families crushed under skyrocketing costs. Tariffs lit the fire, but Canada's brutal counterstrike turned it into a full-blown economic inferno.
We have made very clear that we will act, we have a strategy to fight, protect, and build.
Canada just pulled the plug. In 2025, Ontario and the rest of Canada cut off America's lumber lifeline in one of the most brutal trade responses we've seen in decades.
At this hinge moment in history, Canada is starting to shift from reliance to resilience.
Speaking here on Vancouver Island, Carney said the world woke up to dramatic moves, and he said there may be tough days ahead with the U.S. driving itself into a recession.
Overnight, the flow of wood that kept the U.S. housing market alive was gone. Construction sites stalled, contractors scrambled, futures markets spiked like alarms going off in real time. America had been leaning on Canada for nearly 1/3 of its lumber needs, 28 million cubic meters a year, and now, zero. What I'm about to show you will make you question if the American dream was ever real.
So, $1.2 billion poured into this industry at the same time, a doubling of tariff.
This wasn't some tantrum. It was the product of months of rising tensions. On February 1st, 2025, Washington hiked tariffs another 25%, stacking on top of the existing 14.54%. Then came July 25th. The U.S. Commerce Department locked in a fresh 20.56% anti-dumping duty. A week later, August 1st, the hammer fell. No loopholes, no wiggle room. Canadian lumber companies were suddenly facing 35–40% in total duties. It wasn't policy. It was a baseball bat across the face of cross-border trade. Here's where it gets worse. Washington thought Canada would cave. They thought wrong.
On Friday, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced it plans to raise them to 34.45%.
In D.C., officials assumed Canada would grumble, maybe file a WTO complaint, but keep shipping. That was the miscalculation of the century. Ottawa wasn't bluffing, and Ontario wasn't about to bleed itself dry so American homebuyers could have cheap 2x4s. When the U.S. doubled down, Canada weaponized the one thing the U.S. couldn't live without: lumber. And what Canada did next flipped the script completely.
BC's Premier David Eby called them an attack on forestry workers who number 50,000 in the province.
So, $1.2 billion poured into this industry at the same time, a doubling of tariffs.
Ottawa didn't just cut supply. It rolled out $1.2 billion in aid to keep sawmills alive, pay workers, and fund expansion into new markets. Ontario even floated quotas, deciding how much the U.S. would get instead of swallowing Washington's tariff games. For the first time in years, the leverage shifted north,
pointing to a report showing that the tariffs have added $6,000 to the cost of building a single-family home in the United States.
What this exposed was brutal. America's lumber independence was a myth. U.S. mills, even at maximum output, can only cover 70% of demand. The remaining 25 to 30% came almost entirely from Canada. Without it, America's so-called self-reliance collapsed overnight.
The bulk of funding will go toward loan guarantees, with the rest for product development and diversification. Softwood lumber has long been a target of the U.S.
The irony cut deepest here. Tariffs designed to protect American producers backfired. Lumber prices surged, projects froze, and the U.S. housing market suddenly saw what Canada already knew. Without Canadian supply, America wasn't just short on wood, it was exposed. And the fallout hit fast, like a wrecking ball through the American dream. By March 2025, lumber futures spiked to $650 per $1,000 board feet, with warnings of $765 looming. Lumber makes up about 35% of a home's construction cost. That meant every new build suddenly became $5,000 to $8,000 more expensive before foundations were even poured. By late 2025, the nightmare was real. Costs ballooned to $20,000 or even $30,000 per single-family home. Imagine saving for years only to be told you need another 30 grand because of lumber politics.
British Columbia lumber organizations are condemning the sharp increase, calling it unjustified, punitive, and protectionist. They say it will harm workers, families, and communities across the province.
And this slammed into families already suffocating under sky-high interest rates. Mortgage costs were brutal, and now Washington had dropped a lumber tax bomb on top. The National Association of Home Builders warned of a 10 to 15% spike in construction costs nationwide.
These tariffs are hurting people on both sides of the borders, and not just the industries, but the people who are dependent on lumber to build homes and for their industries.
Some regions suffered harder than others. California, already a housing disaster zone, took a sledgehammer hit. Prices that were already insane went stratospheric, burying homeownership dreams. Texas, where whole subdivisions rise overnight, saw growth kneecapped. Contractors and developers were stuck mid-project, crews idling, budgets shredded. Across both coasts and the heartland, chaos reigned. Frustrated workers, frozen builds, furious buyers, and the ripple effects didn't stop at construction sites.
Simply because we cannot supply it here in America. We don't have the trees, we can't grow it fast enough, and so we rely on our greatest trade partner in Canada to help provide and to make up for that softwood.
Cross-border retail, once thriving, collapsed overnight. Traffic across the Rainbow Bridge fell 33%. Peace Bridge, down 12%. Erie County, New York, alone lost $4.9 million in tax revenue in a single month. That's not a blip, that's potholes unfilled, schools cutting corners, and public services bleeding dry.
Canada remains committed to CUSMA for the stability and the prosperity it provides on both sides of the border.
North of the border, Canada didn't sulk. They pivoted hard. Instead of dumping raw logs like the 1950s, they climbed the value chain, engineered wood, prefabricated modules, cabinets, furniture, products that sold for more, dodged many tariffs, and reshaped their industry.
There have been long-standing disputes between Canada and the U.S. on softwood lumber, dating back decades.
Since 2020, Canada's processed wood exports had already risen 12%, while raw lumber exports shrank. That was no accident, it was strategy. Why sell sugar when you can sell gourmet chocolate? Same raw material, far higher margins, fewer headaches. And Canada didn't stop there. It built a new future. Exports to Asia Pacific and Europe surged. China, South Korea, Japan, all eager to snap up what Washington tossed aside. Canada wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, transforming from one customer dependency to a diversified powerhouse.
The real people that pay for tariffs are consumers, and consumers in the United States who want to build a home, or some of the folks that I've met over the last number of months who lost everything in California to wildfires, to hurricanes in North Carolina, they're going to be paying out of pocket.
While American families scrambled for an extra $30,000 to afford homes, Canada leveled up. New markets, stronger industries, and a smirk. Washington, meanwhile, was left with angry builders, furious buyers, and a housing market on life support. That's not competition, that's checkmate.
We'll provide up to $700 million in loan guarantees. This will ensure that forestry companies of all sizes have the competitive financing they need to maintain and restructure, if necessary, their operations during a period of profound.
Ottawa even rolled out legal cannons, filing CUSMA challenges against Washington's anti-dumping orders. And when tariff math got ugly, Canfor slapped with 41.67%, Tolko 30%, West Fraser 16.5%, Canada didn't flinch. They called it a measured defense. Translation, you tried to crush our workers. We're not letting it happen. Washington failed to grasp how fast Canada could pivot. While U.S. politicians gave speeches, Canada rerouted 28 million cubic meters to Asia and Europe. That wasn't just agility. It was a masterclass in trade strategy, and the message was brutal. You're not our only customer anymore.
To make the softwood lumber industry more competitive for the long term, we will provide an additional $500 million, largely in grants and contributions to supercharge new product development and new market diversification.
The U.S. had spent years bragging about independence, but when the Canadian tap shut, that independence collapsed like a rotten deck. America leaned on Canada the way a broke college kid leans on instant noodles. Cheap, reliable, always there. Then one day the shelves went empty. No backup plan.
I think Donald Trump needs to recognize, and also all of the elected people in the United States of America need to recognize that while this is attacking hardworking forestry workers in Canada,
you can't just grow forests overnight. Lumber takes decades, not days. This isn't fast food. You can't order 1 million cubic meters on Monday and expect it Friday. Washington's tariffs ignored that reality, and the result was devastating. By the time the sawdust settled, the scoreboard was clear. Canada walked away with new markets, stronger industries, and leverage. Washington walked away with spiraling costs, furious homebuyers, and a reputation for shooting itself in the foot. That's the chessboard. And Canada? They weren't playing defense. They were playing to win.